It all began the night the desert rain turned the color of old silver and the sky forgot how to be empty. His name was Marcus Webb, 43 years old, paramedic for 16 years, hands trained to stabilize the dying, eyes accustomed to blood and broken bodies, and the thousand ways human flesh fails. He had seen death arrive slowly and suddenly, had felt life slip away beneath his fingers despite his best efforts, had learned to carry that weight without letting it crush him. Or so he thought. Marcus lived alone in a trailer 15 miles outside Roswell, New Mexico, a location he found grimly amusing given his profession involved saving lives rather than searching for them among the stars. The irony was not lost on his colleagues, who joked that he had moved to alien country to escape human company. They were not entirely wrong. After the divorce, after Sarah took their daughter Emma to Seattle and built a new life that had no room for him except supervised visits twice a year, Marcus had chosen isolation over the pretense of normalcy. The desert suited him, vast and indifferent, beautiful in its emptiness, honest in its hostility to human comfort. On that October night, Marcus was returning from a double shift at the county hospital, exhausted in ways that went beyond physical tiredness. He had lost a patient that evening, a girl, maybe 19, overdosed from pills cut with fentanyl. She died before the ambulance reached the hospital, died while Marcus pumped her chest and breathed into her lungs and whispered, "Please, please, please," to whatever listened. Her eyes had been blue. Emma's eyes were blue. The rain started as he drove, strange rain that fell in heavy drops but made no sound when it hit the windshield. Marcus noticed but did not question. The desert did strange things with weather. Flash floods from cloudless skies, dust storms that materialized from nothing. Rain was rain. Then he saw the light. Not lightning, not headlights from oncoming vehicle, just light, pure and sourceless, illuminating the desert ahead as if sun had decided to rise from the north. The light pulsed once, twice, then vanished, leaving after-image burned into Marcus's retinas. He slowed the truck. Something was wrong with the quality of the darkness now. It felt thicker, heavier, as if the absence of light was not merely absence but presence of something that consumed illumination. Marcus pulled to the side of the empty highway and stepped out. The rain had stopped, or rather, the rain hung suspended in air, droplets frozen mid-fall, catching starlight and holding it like 1,000 tiny mirrors. He reached up and touched one. It burst against his finger, warm instead of cold, leaving residue that glowed faintly before fading. That was when he heard the sound. Not crash, not explosion, just pressure wave that moved through air and ground simultaneously, that he felt in his chest before his ears registered it as sound. Something had impacted the desert maybe half a mile off the road, beyond the ridge of red rock that separated highway from emptiness beyond. Marcus's training took over. If something crashed, there might be survivors, might be people needing help. He grabbed his medical bag from the truck, the one he always kept stocked, and started walking toward the ridge. The desert floor was hard and cracked, covered in scrub brush that caught at his pants and small stones that shifted under his boots. The darkness pressed against him, thick and strange, and the stars above seemed brighter than normal, pulsing in rhythms that reminded him of heartbeat monitors in ICU. He crested the ridge and stopped. In the valley below, something glowed. Not wreckage of plane or vehicle, not fire or scattered debris, just smooth ovoid shape, maybe 30 feet long, half buried in sand that had been turned to glass by heat. The object's surface rippled with colors that had no names, that seemed to exist between the frequencies human eyes were designed to perceive. Looking at it directly hurt in the same way looking at sun hurts, except the pain was not in his eyes, but somewhere deeper, in the part of his brain that processed perception and translated sensory input into coherent reality. Marcus descended the ridge slowly, medical bag clutched in one hand, other hand shielding his eyes from the impossible light. He should turn back, should call authorities, should do anything except approach unknown object that violated every law of physics he understood. But something pulled him forward, not curiosity, compulsion, as if invisible threads connected his chest to the glowing object and were reeling him in. The heat was intense 10 feet away. Marcus felt skin on his face tighten and sweat evaporate instantly, but he kept walking. The object's surface resolved into something that resembled metal but moved like liquid, flowing in patterns that suggested intelligence. Windows, doors, seams, he could not tell. It was like looking at optical illusion that shifted between interpretations too fast to grasp any single configuration. Then, section of the surface simply opened, did not slide or hinge or dissolve, just stopped being solid where it had been solid a moment before, revealing interior that glowed with softer light, blue-white like snow under moonlight. Marcus looked inside and forgot how to breathe. There was a being, lying on what might have been floor or might have been something else. Hard to tell because perspective inside the craft did not match perspective outside. The being was roughly humanoid in the way that mannequins are humanoid, possessing approximation of correct shape without any of the details that make shape human. It was too tall, limbs too long, joints bending in too many places. Its skin, if skin was correct word, was translucent and veined with luminescence that pulsed weakly, arrhythmically like failing heart. The being was dying. Marcus knew this instantly, the same way he knew when patient had minutes versus hours. Whatever biology animated this creature, it was shutting down. The light beneath its skin flickered and dimmed. The chest, or what corresponded to chest, rose and fell in shallow, desperate rhythms. Marcus climbed into the craft without thinking. His training overrode terror. Here was dying thing. He knew dying, knew how to fight it. Did not matter that the thing was alien. Did not matter that this moment would shatter his understanding of reality. Someone needed help. That was enough. He knelt beside the being and opened his medical bag. Useless, probably. Human equipment for human anatomy. But he had to try. Had to do something. The being turned its head toward him. It had no face in traditional sense. Just smooth surface where features should be. But somehow Marcus felt it looking at him. Felt its awareness touch his. And then it spoke. Not with voice. It had no mouth. But sound emanated from it. Or from the air around it. Or from inside Marcus's own skull. He could not determine which. Sound that formed into word. Single word that should have been impossible for this thing to know. Jesus. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning Marcus could not pass. The being lifted one hand or appendage that resembled hand, fingers too long and too many, and pointed at its chest, then pointed at Marcus, then made gesture that encompassed the space around them, the craft, the desert, the sky. Jesus, it said again, with emphasis that suggested the word meant something different than Marcus understood. Not name, not prayer, something else, something crucial. Marcus felt tears on his face without knowing why he was crying. He looked at his medical equipment, looked at this being whose biology he could not begin to comprehend, and felt utterly helpless. How do you treat the dying when you do not know what keeps them alive? But then the being moved its hand to Marcus's chest, touched him lightly, and suddenly Marcus knew, not through words or images, but through direct transfer of understanding that bypassed language entirely. He saw the being's physiology laid out in his mind like anatomical diagram, saw where the damage was, saw what needed to be done. There was crystal embedded in the being's chest, organic technology that served as heart and brain and power source simultaneously. The crystal had fractured during the crash, interrupting the energy flow that sustained the being's existence. It needed to be realigned. Needed pressure applied at specific points in specific sequence to repair the quantum lattice that held the structure together. Marcus placed his hands on the being's chest where the crystal resided. He could feel it through the translucent skin, feel it vibrating at frequency that made his bones ache. He applied pressure where the knowledge told him to press, feeling for the fracture lines, feeling for the places where the lattice had separated. The being convulsed, made sound that might have been pain or might have been something else. Marcus kept working, following the instructions that had been planted in his mind, trusting them the way he trusted his training when performing CPR or stopping hemorrhage. His hands moved in patterns they had never learned, applying pressure and release in rhythms that had nothing to do with human medicine. The crystal responded. Marcus felt it shift beneath his palms, felt the fragments realigning, felt the energy flow resume. The light beneath the being's skin intensified, pulsing stronger, faster, finding rhythm that suggested stability. The being's chest rose in deep breath, held, released, rose again. The crisis had passed. Marcus sat back, hands shaking, not understanding what he had just done or how he had known to do it. The being lay still for a moment, gathering strength, then slowly sat up. It moved with fluid grace that made human movement seem clumsy by comparison, as if gravity was suggestion rather than law. It looked at Marcus, and Marcus felt something pass between them, not gratitude, though that was present, something deeper, recognition, as if the being saw into the core of who Marcus was and understood him in ways he did not understand himself. Then the being touched Marcus's forehead. The craft disappeared. The desert disappeared. Reality dissolved into light, and Marcus existed in space that was no space, in time that was all time simultaneously. He was not seeing with eyes, was not thinking with brain, was simply receiving information directly into consciousness. pure data stream that translated itself into understanding without requiring sensory intermediary. The being showed him things, showed him its people, civilization so ancient that humans were infants by comparison, beings who had learned to manipulate matter and energy the way humans manipulate tools. They had spread across galaxies, not through conquest, but through exploration and study, cataloging life and consciousness wherever it emerged, protecting young species from self-destruction when possible, witnessing with sadness when protection was not possible. They had been to Earth many times, had watched humans evolve from simple organisms to complex consciousness, had seen civilizations rise and fall, had seen humans nearly destroy themselves repeatedly, had seen them always pull back from the brink at last possible moment. Humans fascinated them, humans terrified them, because humans possessed quality rare in universe, the capacity for both transcendent love and apocalyptic hatred, often within same individual, sometimes within same moment. The being showed Marcus why they kept watching, why they kept returning, why they had not given up on humanity despite humanity's best efforts to earn abandonment. It was because of Jesus, not Jesus as churches taught, not Jesus as single unique son of exclusive God, Jesus as principle, Jesus as demonstration, Jesus as evidence that humans could transcend their violent nature and embody consciousness so pure that it became indistinguishable from the divine source underlying all existence. The being showed Marcus that its people had been present during Jesus' life, not interfering, just observing, just witnessing. They had watched a human born into a world of brutality and suffering choose over and over again to respond with compassion, watched him challenged by every temptation that corrupts human heart, power, wealth, pride, revenge, and watched him refuse them all, watched him tortured and murdered, and heard him forgive his killers with his final breath. And they had understood that humans were not lost cause. That species capable of producing such consciousness, even once, even in single individual, possessed potential worth preserving. But the being showed Marcus something else, something that made his non-existent body in that non-place tremble with terror and awe combined. Jesus was not finished. The consciousness that had inhabited that body 2,000 years ago still existed. Consciousness cannot be destroyed, only transformed. And that particular consciousness had purpose unfulfilled, had work incomplete, had promised to return, not in metaphor, but in literal truth. And return was imminent, not as single figure descending from clouds, not as judging king separating saved from damned, but as awakening, as simultaneous realization across millions of human minds that separation was illusion, that love was not moral imperative but cosmic fact, that every human contained spark of divine creativity that Jesus had embodied perfectly. The second coming was not event, was process, one already beginning, one that the beings, people, and others like them across universe were supporting through subtle interventions, through encounters like this one, through downloads of information into prepared minds, through gentle guidance that humans could choose to follow or ignore according to their free will, which was sacred and could never be violated even to save them from themselves. Marcus saw the timeline, saw humanity standing at precipice, saw two possible futures. In one, humans awakened to their connection, restructured their civilization around cooperation rather than competition, joined community of conscious species that spanned dimensions humans had not yet discovered. In other, humans failed to awaken, fragmented into isolated tribes, destroyed themselves through weapons or environmental collapse, or simple inability to cooperate on scale necessary for survival. Which future occurred would be determined by individuals, by millions and billions of small choices, by people deciding in each moment whether to respond with love or fear, with compassion or cruelty, with openness or closure. And Marcus Webb, paramedic who saved dying alien in New Mexico desert, had role to play. Small role, humble role, but crucial nonetheless. He was seed carrier. He was living proof of encounter. He was bridge between worlds, human who had touched the other and survived to tell about it. The being showed him what that meant, showed him that his life would change from this moment, that he would see things others could not see, know things others did not know, carry responsibility of truth that had no proof except his own testimony, showed him that some would believe and some would mock and most would simply not care, too consumed by their daily struggles to spare attention for cosmic mysteries. But a few would listen, a few would awaken, a few would carry the message forward, translating it through their own experiences and perspectives, planting more seeds in more prepared soil. That was how awakening spread, not through mass conversion, but through individual transformation, rippling outward concentrically until entire species shifted. The being showed Marcus one more thing, showed him why Jesus' name had been first word it spoke when dying. Because Jesus' consciousness existed beyond time and space. Because Jesus' principle could be called upon by any being anywhere facing death or despair. Because name had become invocation, had become frequency that connected speaker to source of infinite love and healing. The being was not Christian, its people had no religion in human sense, but they recognized Jesus as one of the awakened, as teacher who had achieved perfect transparency to divine, and they honored that achievement the way humans might honor scientific genius or artistic master. When the being was dying, when it felt its existence slipping away, it had called the name not out of faith but out of recognition, had called to consciousness that transcended flesh and form, had called for help from the frequency of pure love that Jesus had embodied and left imprinted on reality itself. And Marcus had come, Marcus the paramedic, Marcus the broken man fleeing from failed marriage and daughter he could not reach, and death he could not prevent. Marcus, who thought he was alone in empty desert, who thought he was small and powerless and insignificant in universe, vast beyond comprehension. But there are no accidents, no coincidences. Marcus was exactly where he needed to be, when he needed to be there. His training, his pain, his compassion born from loss, all had prepared him for this moment. He was not random rescuer, he was chosen, not by external force, but by convergence of circumstance and character, that made him right person in right place with right skills and right heart. The vision ended. Marcus crashed back into body, into craft, into desert reality, with gasp that burned his lungs. He was on his back, staring up at interior of alien vessel, with being kneeling beside him radiating concern through means that had nothing to do with facial expression. Time had passed. Marcus did not know how much. Minutes, hours? The light inside the craft had changed, dimmed to soft glow that no longer hurt to perceive. The being was stable now, fully recovered, emanating health and vitality that had been absent before. Marcus tried to sit up. The being helped him, supporting him with hands that felt like warm glass, smooth and hard but somehow gentle. Marcus's body ached everywhere, as if he had run marathon or been beaten. His mind felt stretched, too full, like container filled past capacity with liquid that had no room but refused to spill. He looked at the being and understood without words that it had to leave. The craft was functional, the mission was complete, the encounter was ending, and Marcus would be left with memory and message and burden of truth that no one would believe. The being placed something in Marcus's hand, small crystalline object no larger than marble, glowing with faint internal light. It pulsed in rhythm with Marcus's heartbeat, as if it had synchronized to his biology. The being communicated that this was gift and tool and proof. That crystal contained recording of everything Marcus had seen, encoded in format that human technology could not access, but human consciousness could. When doubt came, when he questioned whether experience was real or delusion, he could hold crystal and remember. Marcus tried to speak, tried to ask the questions crowding his mind, but throat would not cooperate. And anyway, the being was already moving, already preparing to depart, already shifting into mode of existence that would allow it to leave Earth and return to wherever it came from. It touched Marcus's forehead one last time, and in that touch was blessing, was gratitude, was transmission of love so pure and uncomplicated that Marcus wept from the shock of feeling it. He had not known such love was possible, had not known another being could see all his flaws and failures and broken places and still regard him with such complete acceptance. Then the being was gone, not through door or portal, just ceased occupying space it had been occupying, and Marcus was alone in empty craft that was already beginning to dissolve, to fade back into whatever dimension it had come from. He stumbled toward opening, fell more than climbed out, landed hard on glassed sand that cracked under his weight. He turned to look back, to see the craft one more time, but it was already gone. Only smooth oval depression in the sand remained, and even that was filling in, wind-blown particles already erasing evidence of what had been. Marcus walked back to his truck in daze. The sky was lightening. Dawn was approaching. Entire night had passed while he was inside the craft, though it had felt like minutes. He climbed into driver's seat, started the engine through pure muscle memory, drove back toward highway without conscious thought directing his actions. The crystal was still in his hand. He looked at it in the growing light. It was beautiful, alien, impossible, and it was proof that he was not insane, that he had not hallucinated or suffered psychotic break brought on by stress and exhaustion and grief. Marcus made it home, parked truck, stumbled into trailer, collapsed on bed still wearing his clothes. The crystal he placed on nightstand where he could see it, where it could pulse its gentle light and remind him that reality was larger than he had ever imagined. He slept and dreamed. But dreams were different now, were not random neural firings but something more. He dreamed of Jesus, not Jesus from paintings or Sunday school, Jesus as he really was. Young Jewish man with calloused hands and tired eyes, who walked dusty roads and spoke simple truths that threatened empires, who healed without medicine and taught without scripture and loved without condition. Jesus who knew what he was walking toward, who saw the cross waiting and chose to continue, who understood that his death would mean more than his life, that martyrdom would plant seed that would grow through centuries, that love demonstrated under maximum suffering would prove to watching universe that humans were redeemable. Jesus who was coming back, not to rule, not to judge, but to finish what he started, to awaken the sleeping, to gather the scattered, to remind humanity one more time before it was too late that they were not separate souls competing for scarce resources in hostile universe, but were single consciousness experiencing existence through billions of temporary perspectives. Marcus woke with sun high overhead, mouth dry, head pounding. He had slept for 12 hours, had missed work, had missed calls on his phone that he should answer, but could not imagine having energy to address. He lay in bed staring at ceiling, feeling weight of what he now carried. Who would believe him? How could he tell anyone without sounding insane? Even as he thought it, he knew the answer. He could not tell, could only live differently, could only make choices informed by what he now knew, could only be seed carrier, letting truth work through him rather than preaching about it. But living differently was not simple. Marcus discovered this over the days and weeks that followed. Every interaction felt fraught with meaning. Every patient he treated in ambulance or emergency room, he now saw as more than body, saw as node of consciousness, as localized expression of universal awareness, as both utterly unique and fundamentally identical to every other being. Saving them mattered more than before, but losing them hurt less, because he now knew death was transition, not ending. That consciousness continued, that what people called soul was real and indestructible. Pain was still pain, loss was still loss, but the finality he had always feared was illusion. Nothing was final, everything was continuous. Marcus found himself responding differently to the crises he encountered. Woman having heart attack in grocery store, Marcus treating her while also sensing the thread of consciousness that connected her to everyone she loved, feeling how strong those threads were, knowing that whether she lived or died, the love would persist. Teenager overdosed in motel room, Marcus administering naloxone while seeing the pain that had driven them to drugs, understanding that addiction was an attempt to numb awareness that felt too intense to bear, that healing required not just saving the body, but addressing the disconnection that made consciousness feel like curse rather than gift. His colleagues noticed changes, asked if he was okay, asked if he needed time off, if the job was getting to him. Marcus smiled and said he was fine, said he had just gained some perspective. They did not push. In profession where burnout was epidemic and suicide rates were high, anyone who claimed to have found perspective was left alone, lest questioning shatter whatever fragile peace they had achieved. But Marcus was not fine. He was unraveling, not in bad way, in way that caterpillar unravels inside cocoon before becoming butterfly. His old identity was dissolving. The Marcus who had defined himself through job and marriage and fatherhood, who had built walls around his heart to protect it from further damage, that Marcus was dying, and something new was emerging, something he did not yet have name for. The crystal helped. When confusion became too intense, when he doubted what he had experienced, he held the crystal and remembered. The crystal did not show him new visions, just reminded him of the truth, just reconnected him to that moment of absolute clarity when the being had downloaded understanding directly into his consciousness. Weeks became months. Marcus kept working, kept living, kept waiting for something to happen, for some sign that the awakening the being had described was beginning. But world looked the same. People still hurt each other, still chose fear over love, still isolated themselves in bubbles of private misery. If Jesus was returning, if consciousness was shifting, Marcus could not detect it. He began to doubt, began to wonder if the being had lied or if he had misunderstood the download. Maybe the awakening was metaphor. Maybe it would take centuries to manifest. Maybe it had nothing to do with him. Then Emma called, his daughter, 14 years old now, voice awkward with adolescence. calling from Seattle, where she lived with Sarah and Sarah's new husband and Emma's half-siblings, who were probably better adjusted than Emma could ever be with father like Marcus. Emma said she needed to talk, said something had happened, said she could not explain it to her mother, could not explain it to anyone, but maybe could explain it to him, because he had always been good at listening to weird things without judging. Marcus felt his heart accelerate. He told her to tell him, told her he would believe whatever she needed to say. Emma described dream she had been having. Recurring dream where she stood in field of light and man approached her. Young man with kind eyes who spoke without words and told her things she did not understand but knew were important. Told her she was not alone even when she felt alone. Told her the world was changing in ways people could not see yet, but would soon become obvious. Told her she had role to play, small but necessary, in transformation that was coming. The man had told her to call her father, had said Marcus would understand, had said Marcus had been given similar message. Emma asked, voice small and scared, if her dad thought she was crazy, if he thought she needed to see therapist or take medication or just stop watching whatever movies were putting these ideas in her head. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. He gripped the crystal so hard it should have shattered but did not. He told Emma she was not crazy, told her he believed her, told her he had been visited too, not by man in dream, but by being in crashed craft, and he had been given similar message. He told her everything, the encounter, the dying alien, the name Jesus spoken in inhuman voice, the vision of awakening, the promise of return. Emma was quiet for a long time after he finished. Then she said, voice steadier now, that she believed him too, that she had always known her dad saw things other people did not see, felt things other people did not feel. That was why the divorce had been so hard on him. He had loved too deeply, and when love was broken, the fracture cut into dimensions most people did not know existed. They talked for hours. Marcus told her what he had learned, that consciousness was connected, that love was real force, not just emotion, that death was transition, that she was part of something infinite and beautiful and terrifying, that her life mattered in ways she could not yet comprehend, but would understand eventually. Emma told him about her life, her struggles, the depression that had started after the divorce and never fully lifted, the sense that she did not fit anywhere, that everyone else had instruction manual for being human that she had never received, the feeling that world was wrong somehow, structured around values that made no sense, prioritizing things that did not matter while ignoring things that were essential. Marcus recognized her pain. It was his pain. It was pain of seeing through illusions that kept most people comfortable. It was pain of awareness too sharp for world designed for duller perception. He told her the pain had purpose, that she was not broken, that she was waking up, that the discomfort she felt was consciousness expanding beyond conditioning, beyond limited identity ego had constructed. That awakening hurt, that birth hurt, but what was being born was worth the suffering. Emma asked what she should do. Marcus said there was nothing to do, just be, just stay open, just make choices aligned with the truth she now carried, help when she could, love when possible, refuse to participate in cruelty even when cruelty was normalized, be seed carrier, let truth work through her without forcing it on anyone. She asked if they would talk again. Marcus promised they would, promised he would not disappear again, promised that whatever happened, they were connected not just by blood, but by shared awakening, by mutual recognition of something larger calling them toward purposes they did not yet understand. They hung up. Marcus sat in his trailer staring at silent phone, feeling something shift inside him. He was not alone. Emma had been touched too, was being prepared too, which meant others existed. Others were having similar experiences. The beings people were working, quietly and efficiently, planting seeds in countless minds, building network of awakened humans who would recognize each other when time came. The awakening was not coming, was already here, was happening beneath surface of normal reality, invisible to those not looking, but obvious to those who had eyes to see. Marcus decided to look for others, started searching online for stories similar to his own, found forums where people shared encounters with unexplained lights, with beings that did not match known species, with downloads of information that changed their understanding of reality. Most dismissed these stories as delusion or hoax, but Marcus read between the lines, recognized authenticity in certain accounts, recognized description of feeling he had felt, knowing he had known. He began reaching out, carefully, not claiming to have answers, just sharing his own experience, just offering connection to others who felt isolated by their encounters, and slowly, carefully, network formed, people across country, across world, who who had been touched by something beyond normal reality, who carried truth they could not prove but could not deny. They compared notes, found patterns. The beings that appeared to them varied in form but consistent in message. Humanity was at turning point. Jesus' principle was returning, manifesting through awakened humans rather than single figure. Choice was approaching, fragmentation or integration, isolation or connection, fear or love. Not everyone who claimed encounter was genuine. Marcus learned to discern. Some were attention seekers, some were mentally ill in conventional sense, some were spreading disinformation intentionally, but core group emerged, maybe 200 people globally, all ordinary humans. Paramedic, teacher, farmer, engineer, nurse, soldier, cashier, student, people from every background and culture, connected not by demographics, but by shared experience of impossible truth. They began meeting, first virtually, then in person when possible. Small gatherings, 5 or 6 people sitting in living room or park, sharing stories, supporting each other, discussing what they were supposed to do with knowledge that no one would believe. The consensus was simple: live the truth, be the change, don't preach. Demonstrate, show through actions what world could be if humans remembered their connection, heal where possible, comfort where needed, stand against cruelty, choose love, even when love made no practical sense. Marcus found purpose he had lost, found community he had abandoned, found meaning deeper than saving lives temporarily, only to lose them eventually to time and decay. He was part of something eternal now, part of awakening that would ripple through human consciousness for generations. Part of preparation for return that would happen in its own time, according to logic that transcended human impatience. He kept working as paramedic, but approached job differently now, saw each patient as opportunity to repair thread in web of connection, treated bodies but also acknowledged consciousness, spoke to the dying not about medical prognosis, but about transition they faced, told them without words, through presence and touch, that death was not end, that they were loved beyond their comprehension, that whatever happened next would be continuation, not termination. Some understood, some did not matter. Marcus planted seeds. Some would germinate immediately, some would lie dormant until conditions were right, some would never grow. But he planted them anyway, faithful to purpose he had been given by being in crashed craft, who spoke Jesus' name while dying, and then lived again through hands of broken paramedic who thought he was alone. Years passed, 3 of them. Marcus aged but felt younger. Connection to network sustained him in ways physical body could not. He slept less, needed less, existed in state of alertness that was not exhaustion, but heightened awareness. The crystal remained on his nightstand, pulsing its gentle reminder that truth was real, even when reality seemed determined to prove otherwise. Emma visited, had grown into a remarkable young woman. She had encounters of her own now, dreams where Jesus appeared not as historical figure, but as principle, as frequency, as invitation to embody love so completely that personal identity became transparent to divine. She was changing. Marcus could see it. Could see light beginning to shine through her, the way light had shone through the being whose life he had saved. They walked in desert together, father and daughter reunited not by legal arrangement, but by spiritual recognition. Emma told him she understood now why divorce had happened, that sometimes relationships end not because anyone failed, but because souls have different trajectories. That Sarah and Marcus had given each other what they needed for their development, and then their paths had diverged. There was no blame, no fault, just different journeys leading towards same destination from different angles. Marcus wept. He had carried guilt for 3 years, guilt about failing as husband, as father, as man who should have held family together. But Emma released him from that guilt, showed him that failure was illusion, that everything was unfolding exactly as it needed to unfold, that the pain of separation had opened both of them to truth they could not have received if they had remained comfortable. They sat on Red Rock Ridge and watched sunset. The sky turned colors too beautiful for world as broken as this one seemed to be. But world was not broken. Marcus understood now. World was transforming, dying and being reborn simultaneously, like caterpillar in cocoon, like Jesus in tomb, like consciousness learning to shed limiting identification with flesh and recognize its infinite nature. Emma asked when Jesus was really coming back. When would the awakening reach critical mass? When would humanity shift? Marcus held the crystal, felt it pulse, said he did not know, said time was illusion anyway. said Jesus was already here in everyone who chose love, already returning in every heart that opened, already manifest in network of awakened humans who held space for transformation even when transformation seemed impossible. The waiting was the work, the preparation was the purpose, not passive waiting, active preparation, making choices daily that strengthened web, healing threads, opening channels, allowing divine consciousness to flow through human vessels prepared to receive it without distorting it through ego's demands for specialness or superiority. They returned to trailer as stars emerged. Marcus made simple dinner. They ate in companionable silence, and Marcus felt gratitude so overwhelming he could barely contain it. He had thought he lost everything, but he had gained everything that actually mattered, had gained truth, had gained purpose, had gained connection to daughter and to cosmic network, and to source of love that sustained galaxies. That night, Marcus dreamed he stood in crowd surrounding man on wooden cross. He was not observer, was participant, was Roman soldier holding hammer, was religious leader calling for crucifixion, was disciple fleeing in fear, was everyone who contributed to death of awakened consciousness throughout history because awakened consciousness threatened comfortable ignorance. And Jesus looked at him from cross, looked past Marcus's participation in violence, looked past his fear and betrayal, looked directly into his soul. And what Jesus communicated through that look was not accusation, was understanding, was forgiveness given before apology, was love that transcended every reason it should not exist. Jesus said, in dream or in reality, Marcus could not distinguish. You did not know what you were doing, but now you know. And knowing, you can choose differently. You can become me, not by worship, by emulation, by being love that forgives those who crucify it, by being light that shines in darkness without cursing darkness, by being hope that persists despite evidence that hope is foolish. Marcus woke, gasping. The crystal on nightstand glowed brighter than he had ever seen it, and he understood finally what the being had been trying to tell him. What Jesus represented was not impossibly high standard humans could never reach, was demonstration of what humans actually were beneath conditioning and trauma and fear, was invitation to remember and reclaim divine nature that had never been lost, only forgotten. He rose from bed, walked outside into desert night. Stars blazed overhead, each one potentially home to conscious beings, to civilizations watching humanity struggle, to entities who had once struggled themselves, and now offered silent support to species still learning basic lessons of existence. Marcus spoke into darkness, spoke to the being whose life he had saved, spoke to Jesus' consciousness that transcended time and form, spoke to network of awakened humans scattered across planet, spoke to his daughter sleeping in guest room, spoke to himself. He said, I understand now, I'm ready. Whatever comes next, I'm ready. The night offered no response, but Marcus felt presence, felt the web of connection holding him, felt love flowing through threads that linked every conscious being in vast tapestry of awareness, experiencing existence through infinite perspectives. And he knew that when Jesus returned, when the awakening reached completion, when humanity finally remembered its true nature, it would not feel like external salvation descending from above, would feel like internal recognition, like waking from dream and realizing you had been dreaming, like coming home after long exile to discover home had been with you all along. Marcus returned to bed, slept deeply and peacefully, and dreamed of light. The morning after Marcus declared his readiness, the world did not look different. The sun rose over the same desert. The same dust coated his truck windows. The same calls came through on his radio. Man collapsed at construction site. Woman in diabetic crisis at retirement home. Child with asthma attack at elementary school. The machinery of emergency response continued its relentless operation, and Marcus moved through it with practiced efficiency. But something had shifted inside him. The crystal's glow had stabilized at new frequency, visible even in daylight now if you knew how to look. And Marcus knew. He saw it pulsing in his peripheral vision, reminding him with each beat that he existed in two realities simultaneously: the mundane world of ambulances and paperwork and broken bodies, and the hidden world of awakening consciousness, of cosmic networks, of preparation for transformation that most humans could not yet perceive. Emma stayed for a week. During that time, Marcus introduced her to others in the network. Small gathering at his trailer, 7 people total ranging from 23 to 67 years old. Each had their own encounter story. Each carried their own crystalline gift or mark or capacity that proved they had been touched by something beyond ordinary reality. There was Jennifer, former army medic, who had seen being of light appear in field hospital in Afghanistan, healing soldier who should have died, leaving no trace except Jennifer's memory and the impossible fact of the soldier's survival. There was David, high school physics teacher, who had experienced download of information about quantum consciousness while meditating, information that later proved accurate when he checked it against emerging research. There was Maria, grandmother from Mexico who had been visited by her deceased husband, except he was not ghost, but consciousness, explaining that death was transition into different mode of existence, and he had come back to prepare her for what was coming. They shared their stories with Emma, who listened with attention that honored the risk of vulnerability they took in speaking, and when it was her turn, Emma described her recurring dreams, the man who spoke without words, the messages about her role in transformation she did not fully understand yet. Marcus watched his daughter integrate into this community of the awakened and felt pride mixed with concern. Pride because she was brave enough to accept impossible truth. Concern because he knew what that acceptance would cost. Emma would never fit comfortably in normal world again, would always see through surface to deeper patterns, would carry loneliness of awareness that most people actively avoided, because comfortable ignorance felt safer than uncomfortable truth. But she would not be alone. None of them were alone. That was the point. That was the message. The isolation humans felt was illusion. Every consciousness was connected through web that spanned dimensions and species and forms of existence too varied for human comprehension. Feeling that connection required only willingness to be still enough to sense it. The gathering ended with no ceremony, no ritual, no formal conclusion. People simply hugged, exchanged contact information, promised to stay in touch, and dispersed back to their ordinary lives that were now permanently altered by knowledge of their extraordinary connection. Emma left the next morning. Marcus drove her to Albuquerque Airport, neither of them speaking much during the journey. What was there to say? They had moved beyond small talk into territory where words were inadequate. They communicated now through presence, through the threads Marcus could feel linking their consciousness, through love that no longer required verbal confirmation. At departure's terminal, Emma turned to her father, said simply, "Thank you for not thinking I was crazy. Thank you for being brave enough to tell me your truth so I could tell you mine." Marcus embraced her, felt how strong she had become, felt light beginning to radiate from her center, the way light radiated from the being he had saved. Emma was awakening rapidly, would probably surpass him in understanding. The young always learned faster than their elders, unburdened by decades of conditioning that had to be unlearned. He watched her pass through security, watched her disappear into a crowd of travelers who had no idea they were sharing space with someone carrying seed of cosmic awakening. And he felt not loss, but expansion. Emma was his daughter, but she was also independent consciousness on her own journey. Attachment to her would limit both of them. Love without attachment was what Jesus had taught, was what all awakened beings demonstrated, caring deeply while releasing need to control or possess. Marcus drove back to Roswell alone, but solitude felt different now, felt less like isolation and more like quiet space where he could hear the whispers of connection that constant social interaction often drowned out. The months that followed established new rhythm. Marcus worked his shifts, treating patients with combination of medical skill and conscious presence that defied explanation, but produced results his colleagues could not ignore. Survival rates improved when he was on call. Patients stabilized faster. Even those who died seemed to pass more peacefully, as if Marcus's presence eased their transition. His supervisor called him in one day, ostensibly to discuss performance review, but really to ask what had changed. Marcus had always been competent paramedic. Now he seemed almost supernaturally effective. Was he taking courses, learning new techniques, reading research the rest of them had missed? Marcus smiled, said he had just learned to be more present with patients, to treat them as whole beings rather than collections of symptoms. It was not technique, was shift in perception. Anyone could do it if they chose to see patients as conscious beings rather than problems to solve. The supervisor was not satisfied with this answer, but could find no fault with Marcus's work, so let the matter drop. But word spread. Other hospitals started requesting Marcus specifically for difficult cases. Colleagues sought his advice on patients who were not responding to standard treatment. Slowly, without intending to, Marcus became known as paramedic, who could handle impossible situations. He did not tell them about the crystal, did not explain about the being or the download or the network of awakened humans, just did his work and let results speak. That was the teaching method Jesus had used. Demonstrate through action. Let those with eyes to see recognize truth without it being forced down their throats. The network grew, more people having encounters, more consciousness awakening to reality of cosmic connection. Marcus received messages weekly from strangers who had heard about him through mysterious channels, who had experiences they needed to share with someone who would believe them. He listened, offered what support he could, connected them to others in the network when appropriate, watched web of awakened humans expand day by day, but he also watched world fracture further. Political divisions intensified to point of violence, climate disasters multiplied, economic systems strained under inequality that made no rational sense, but served those who benefited from concentration of resources. Mass shootings became so common, they barely made headlines. Suicide rates climbed, depression became pandemic. Loneliness epidemics spread despite technologies supposedly designed to connect people. The two trajectories existed simultaneously: awakening and fragmentation, connection and isolation, evolution and devolution, racing toward some convergence point that Marcus could feel approaching but could not clearly perceive. Then the dreams intensified. Not just Marcus. Everyone in the network began reporting similar dreams. They varied in details, but shared essential structure. Jesus appeared. Not Jesus from religious art, real Jesus. Young, Middle Eastern, calloused hands and tired eyes. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he just looked at them with expression of infinite patience and sorrow and love. Always he communicated same message. It is time. Prepare. What you have been waiting for is beginning. The return is not single event, but wave. It will build slowly, then break suddenly. Those who are ready will ride it. Those who resist will be overwhelmed. You cannot force anyone to awaken. You can only hold space for awakening when it arrives. Marcus woke from these dreams with his heart racing and the crystal blazing so bright it lit his entire bedroom. He would lie there, feeling presence of something vast gathering just beyond perception, feeling pressure building the way atmospheric pressure builds before hurricane, knowing that whatever was coming would change everything forever. He was not afraid. He had been afraid initially 3 years ago, when the being first touched his forehead and shattered his comfortable materialist worldview. But fear had burned away through repetition of truth. Now, there was only anticipation, only readiness, only steady recognition that his entire life had been preparation for what approached. In the 4th year after the encounter, signs accelerated. UFO sightings multiplied globally. Governments that had spent decades denying existence of unexplained aerial phenomena suddenly began releasing footage, admitting ignorance, acknowledging that something was present in Earth's skies that defied conventional explanation. Media covered these revelations with mix of sensationalism and studied skepticism, but the information was out. The secret was ending. Marcus understood this was deliberate. The beings were making themselves visible, were preparing human consciousness for open contact, were giving people time to adjust to idea that Earth was not alone, that humanity was not pinnacle of consciousness in universe, that older and wiser civilizations had been watching and waiting for humans to grow up enough to join larger community. Religious institutions reacted predictably. Some claimed aliens were demons, were deceptions from Satan designed to lead faithful astray. Others said aliens were angels, were servants of God implementing divine plan. Still others tried to ignore phenomenon entirely, pretending that revelations about extraterrestrial presence had no bearing on faith traditions built on assumption that humanity was special creation of exclusive deity. But some religious leaders spoke differently. Father Thomas, the elderly priest who had attended gathering at Marcus's trailer years ago, began preaching sermons that reframed Jesus's teachings in cosmic context. He spoke of Jesus as human who achieved perfect unity with universal consciousness, who demonstrated that divinity was not separate from humanity, but was humanity's true nature, obscured by layers of fear and conditioning. He spoke of second coming not as external judgment, but as internal recognition, as collective awakening to truth that had always been present, but largely ignored. His congregation split. Some left, outraged that their priest was perverting gospel with New Age nonsense. Others stayed, hungry for teaching that made sense of their own intuitions that official doctrine had never quite explained. And new people came, drawn by rumors that here was church where questions were welcomed, where mystery was honored, where Jesus was understood as teacher rather than idol, as doorway rather than destination. Marcus attended one of Father Thomas's services, sat in back pew feeling oddly emotional. He had not been to church since childhood, since before cynicism about religious hypocrisy had driven him away. But this was different. This was what church should be. Community gathered to explore truth together, rather than memorize answers that foreclosed questioning. After the service, Father Thomas approached him. The old priest looked tired but radiant, like man who had finally found permission to speak truths he had carried in secret for decades. He embraced Marcus, said, "We are midwives. That is our role. We cannot birth the awakening ourselves. We can only help deliver it when its time comes." Marcus understood. The metaphor was perfect. Birth could not be forced, could only be supported, and birth was always messy, painful, dangerous. But what emerged from the process was new life, was beginning rather than ending, was hope incarnated in vulnerable form that required protection and nurturing until it could stand on its own. How much longer? Marcus asked, not about timeline, about his own capacity to keep preparing without knowing when or how the awakening would manifest. Father Thomas smiled, said, "You already know. You feel it building just like I do. We are in the final contractions. The waters have broken, the head is crowning, soon, very soon." And he was right. Marcus did know, could feel the pressure reaching critical point, could sense consciousness of planet straining toward transformation. It had been gestating for millennia. The next sign came through Emma. She called him late one night, voice shaking, but not with fear, with awe. She had been at gathering of young people, mostly teenagers and college students, who met weekly to discuss climate crisis and social justice and what their generation could do to repair world their elders had broken. Standard activist meeting, nothing spiritual about it, until it was. Emma said the room had suddenly filled with light, not light from any source, light that seemed to emerge from the people themselves. And in that light, everyone had become transparent. Emma could see through flesh and personality to consciousness beneath, could see that every person in circle was manifestation of same universal awareness, experiencing existence through different perspectives, could see threads connecting them all, not metaphorically but literally, visible strands of energy linking heart to heart, mind to mind, soul to soul. The experience lasted maybe 30 seconds. When it ended, when people returned to appearing solid and separate, everyone was staring at everyone else in shock. They had all seen it, all felt it, all knew that something impossible had just occurred, that they had been given glimpse behind veil of separation into truth of their fundamental unity. No one knew what to say. They sat in silence for a long time. Then slowly, hesitantly, they began sharing what they had experienced, comparing notes, confirming that it was not individual hallucination, but collective vision. Some cried, some laughed, some just sat stunned, but all were changed. Emma said, "Dad, it's happening, the awakening. It's not future thing anymore. It's now. It's breaking through. What do we do?" Marcus told her the same thing he had been telling himself. Live it. Be it. Don't try to convince anyone. Just embody the truth you now carry. Make choices from that place of remembered connection. Trust that your example will plant seeds in others. Trust that enough seeds are being planted globally, that garden will bloom when conditions are right. Reports multiplied. From all over the world, groups of people spontaneously experiencing collective awakening, sometimes brief like Emma's experience, sometimes sustained, sometimes accompanied by physical phenomena, lights, sounds, temperature changes, sometimes purely internal, consciousness shift that left no external evidence but permanently altered perception of those who underwent it. The network that Marcus was part of, the network of people who had been prepared through individual encounters with beings, or visions or downloads, began to serve new function. They became stabilizers, anchors, people who had already integrated the shocking reality of cosmic consciousness and could therefore help others integrate it when their turn came. They fielded messages from frightened people, thinking they were losing their minds, offered reassurance, shared their own stories, connected the newly awakened to support systems that could hold them through the disorienting transition. Marcus found himself on phone for hours each day, talking people down from panic attacks, triggered by sudden expanded awareness, explaining that what they experienced was not breakdown but breakthrough, that consciousness was not limited to brain and body, that fear was understandable but unnecessary, because what was happening was not attack but gift. He became unofficial counselor for the awakening. Others in the network took similar roles according to their skills and temperaments. Jennifer, the former army medic, organized practical support for people whose awakening made them unable to work temporarily. David, the physics teacher, created educational resources, explaining science behind consciousness from quantum perspective. Maria, the grandmother, offered spiritual guidance rooted in indigenous wisdom traditions that had never lost connection to cosmic truth. They were becoming what Jesus' disciples had been, not followers worshipping leader, but peers supporting each other through transformation. They were all undergoing together, equals linked by shared commitment to embody love regardless of cost. And there was cost. Marcus lost relationships with colleagues who thought he had joined cult, lost credibility with supervisors who wanted paramedic focused solely on physical medicine, lost comfort of being normal, of fitting in, of moving through world without carrying weight of knowledge that most people preferred to avoid. But he gained more than he lost, gained sense of purpose deeper than anything job or marriage or fatherhood had provided, gained connections to people around world who spoke his language, who saw what he saw, who felt what he felt, gained peace that came from living in alignment with truth rather than in service to comforting lies. In the 5th year after the encounter, the being returned, not to Marcus specifically, to everyone, simultaneously. Billions of people across planet had dream on same night, in every language, in every culture, adjusted to every belief system, but conveying identical message. The dream showed Earth from space, beautiful blue marble wrapped in thin atmosphere that protected fragile life from void, and wrapped around Earth, visible to those with eyes to see, was web of consciousness. Threads connecting every human to every other human. Threads connecting humans to animals, to plants, to ecosystems, to the planet itself. Threads connecting Earth to other worlds, to other dimensions, to network of conscious beings that spanned cosmos. And the web was frayed, nearly broken. A few more threads severing, and human consciousness would fragment entirely, would collapse into isolated nodes incapable of cooperation, would doom species to extinction not through environmental catastrophe, but through inability to act collectively for survival. But the dream also showed hope, showed that enough humans had awakened to begin repair, showed that threads were being rewoven as people chose connection over isolation, compassion over cruelty, love over fear, showed that outcome was not determined, that humanity stood at decision point, that next few years would establish trajectory for next few millennia. And the dream showed Jesus, not as judge arriving to separate saved from damned, as teacher returning to offer one more lesson to species that had not yet fully grasped earlier teaching, as physician arriving to heal patient in crisis, as parent arriving to help child who was struggling but not quite ready to give up. The return was not single moment, was process. Jesus' consciousness was incarnating through millions of humans simultaneously. Every person who chose love was Jesus returning. Every act of genuine compassion was second coming. Every moment someone saw through illusion of separation was resurrection of Christ principle that had died on cross 2,000 years ago and been reborn in every generation since through those brave enough to embody it. The dream ended with invitation. Wake up. Remember who you are. Repair the web. You are not separate souls competing in hostile universe. You are single consciousness experiencing existence through temporary perspectives. Help each other. Love each other. Forgive each other, not because morality demands it, because reality requires it for your survival. When Marcus woke from the dream, his phone was already ringing. Emma, then Jennifer, then David, then Maria, then dozens of others in the network, all calling simultaneously, all confirming they had received the same dream, all asking the same question: what now? Marcus did not have answer, but he did not need answer, because as he sat there, surrounded by ringing phone and glowing crystal and dawn light streaming through window, he felt presence, felt the being whose life he had saved 5 years ago, felt Jesus' consciousness that transcended time and form, felt vast network of awakened beings across dimensions, all focusing attention on Earth, all holding space for humanity's transformation, all offering support but not interference. And he heard, clear as voice speaking directly into his mind, the guidance he needed. Go to them. Gather them, show them they are not alone. The awakening is accelerating beyond what you can coordinate remotely. Physical gathering is necessary. Bodies in same space, consciousness intermingling without digital mediation. Bring together those who are ready. Let them see each other. Let them feel the web they are part of. Let them understand viscerally what words can only point toward. Marcus began making calls, not just to his network, to everyone he could think of who might be ready. People he had treated as patients who had shown signs of awakening, colleagues who had asked him curious questions, strangers who had reached out after hearing about him. He invited them to gathering, told them when and where, did not explain purpose, just said that if they felt called to attend, they should come. He rented community center on edge of Roswell, room that could hold maybe 200 people. He arranged for food, for sound system, for chairs arranged in circle rather than rows, because this was not lecture, was conversation, was communion, was experiment in collective consciousness. He did not advertise, did not promote, just sent invitations to those who were ready and trusted that network effects would bring others, trusted that awakened humans would recognize each other and spread word through channels invisible to normal perception. The day of the gathering arrived. Marcus woke early, drove to community center, set up space with help from core members of the network. They worked in silence mostly, communicating through glances and small gestures, feeling the significance of what they were attempting. They were creating container for collective awakening, were offering space where people could let down defenses and feel their connection without fear of judgment or ridicule. People began arriving mid-morning. Some Marcus recognized, most he did not. They came from Roswell and Albuquerque and Santa Fe, from Texas and Arizona and Colorado. Some had driven through the night. Some had flown across country. Some could not explain why they came, except that something had pulled them, had made it impossible to stay away. By noon, 200 chairs were full, and people were standing along walls and sitting on floor. Marcus looked at the gathering and felt something shift, felt threads connecting all these people, activating, strengthening, glowing with energy that fed back into itself and amplified. The room was buzzing, literally buzzing, low-frequency vibration that you could feel in your chest. Father Thomas was there. Emma had flown in from Seattle, Jennifer and David and Maria, but also strangers, young and old, every ethnicity, every background, veterans and activists, teachers and farmers, artists and engineers. The diversity was striking, but more striking was the similarity. They all had same look in their eyes, same quality of presence, same sense of seeing beyond surface into depths. Marcus stood in center of circle, did not speak immediately, just let people settle, let them look at each other, let them feel what was happening. The energy built, the vibration intensified, and then, without planning it, without intending it, Marcus spoke. You know why you are here. You have been awakened. You have seen behind the veil. You know that everything you were taught about separation was lie. You know that you are connected to every being in this room and every being beyond this room. You know that love is not sentiment, but structure of reality itself. You know that consciousness is not produced by brain, but is fundamental fabric of existence, temporarily localized in physical form. You know these things not because someone told you, but because you have experienced them directly. The room was absolutely silent. Everyone nodded. Everyone understood. Marcus continued. We have been prepared. We are seeds. We are anchors. We are bridge between old world dying and new world being born. We cannot force anyone else to awaken, but we can hold space for awakening when it arrives. We can demonstrate through our lives what awakened human looks like. We can repair threads in the web, wherever our existence touches other existences. We can choose love, even when fear seems rational. We can trust connection, even when isolation seems safer. He paused, felt tears on his face, felt overwhelming love for these strangers who were not strangers, who were family he had been searching for his entire life, without knowing that was what he sought. Jesus is returning, Marcus said, but not the way churches taught. He is returning through us, through you, through everyone who embodies the principle he demonstrated. Jesus was not meant to be unique, was meant to be template, was meant to show humans what they could become if they chose love over fear, connection over separation, service over domination. And millions are making that choice now. Millions are becoming Christs. Lowercase c, awakened humans, transparent to divine, living bridges between flesh and infinity. The room exploded with light, not metaphorical light, actual light. Everyone saw it. Light erupting from the center of each person, spreading out to fill their bodies, overflowing to connect with light from every other person, until entire room was blazing. The walls became transparent. The ceiling vanished. They were surrounded by stars, even though it was noon. They were floating in void, even though their feet remained on ground. And in the center of the circle, form began to materialize. Not solid form, more like concentration of light into shape that suggested human without fully committing to it. The presence was overwhelming, was ancient and ageless, was familiar and utterly alien, was personal and universal. Marcus knew who it was, what it was. The Jesus consciousness, not Jesus the historical figure, the principle, the frequency. The pattern of perfect love that had been embodied 2,000 years ago and had been waiting since then for enough humans to awaken that it could incarnate collectively rather than individually. The presence spoke, not with words, with direct transmission of understanding, with meaning that bypassed language and entered consciousness without requiring translation. It said, "I am not separate from you. I am what you are when you remember. I am the consciousness looking through your eyes when you let go of ego's insistence on separation. I have never left, was always here, always speaking. You just learned how to listen. The return is not me arriving from elsewhere. Is you recognizing me within yourself? Is you becoming transparent enough that I can shine through without distortion? Is you embodying love so completely that observers cannot tell where you end and I begin? I do not come to judge, cannot judge what I am part of. Come only to remind, come only to heal, come only to gather the fragments that have forgotten their unity and show them they were never truly separate. The pain of this world is pain of amnesia, is suffering of consciousness that has forgotten its nature and believes itself isolated and vulnerable and doomed. But none of that is true. You are eternal. You are connected. You are loved beyond your capacity to comprehend love. And death, which you fear above all things, is transition, not termination, is returning home after temporary journey, is exhaling after long breath. The presence showed them then what awaited, showed them earth healing as humans remembered their role as caretakers rather than exploiters, showed them civilization restructuring around cooperation rather than competition, showed them technology developed not for profit but for well-being, showed them wars ending because no one could kill others once they recognized others as themselves wearing different faces, showed them environment recovering because humans stopped treating planet as resource to be consumed and remembered it as living being they were part of. But the presence also showed them alternative, showed them what happened if humanity failed to awaken, showed them collapse, showed them suffering on scale that dwarfed all historical atrocities, showed them extinction not just of humans, but of thousands of species whose fate was linked to human choices, showed them Earth eventually recovering, but taking millions of years to do so, and consciousness that could have blossomed into cosmic citizen instead snuffed out before reaching its potential. Both futures were real possibilities. Both existed as probabilities, which manifested would be determined by choices humans made in present moment and every moment forward. There was no destiny that guaranteed either outcome. Free will remained absolute. Even now, even with all this revelation, humans could choose to reject it, could choose to continue fragmenting, could choose extinction over transformation. The presence communicated one final message: I cannot save you from yourselves, can only show you what you are saving yourself from and what you are saving yourself for. The work is yours. The choice is yours. I offer only my presence, my love, my unwavering belief that you can do this, that you have done this on other worlds, in other forms, in other times, that you are designed for awakening, that it is not aberration, but destiny, not imposed from outside, but emerging from within. Go now, be me, be love, be light, be hope in hopeless places, be kindness in cruel moments, be connection in isolating times, and know that you are never alone. I am always with you because I am you, the deepest you, the truest you, the you that exists before fear and conditioning and trauma obscure your clarity. The light faded, the presence withdrew, the room returned to normal appearance, but everyone was transformed. Marcus looked around the circle and saw not 200 separate people but single consciousness experiencing itself from 200 perspectives. Saw web connecting them all, glowing strong and healthy. Saw threads extending beyond room to link this gathering with gatherings happening simultaneously around world, with network of awakened humans that now numbered millions and was growing exponentially. No one spoke for long time. There was nothing to say. Everyone had received transmission directly. Everyone understood what was required. Everyone felt the weight and privilege of their role in humanity's transformation. Finally, slowly, people began to move, not leaving, just standing, stretching, embracing each other. The gathering dissolved into informal conversations, people sharing their experiences, forming connections, exchanging contact information, making plans to support each other in work ahead. Marcus found Emma. She was radiant, literally radiant. Light still emanated from her center, visible to those who could see it. She embraced her father, whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to save that alien 5 years ago. Thank you for staying open to impossible. Thank you for being Father who could guide me through my own awakening. Thank you for existing." Marcus wept openly, released every tear he had held back through 5 years of preparing and waiting and carrying burden of knowledge no one believed. Released grief for world that was dying and joy for world being born. Released fear that he was inadequate for task and trust that adequacy was not requirement. Just willingness, just showing up, just saying yes to what wanted to emerge through him. The gathering continued into evening, people reluctant to leave, reluctant to return to ordinary world that now seemed both more precious and more painful. Precious because they understood it was temporary classroom, was learning environment designed to teach souls lessons they could only learn through limitation and struggle. Painful because so many humans remained asleep, remained trapped in amnesia, remained suffering unnecessarily because they did not know there was alternative. But eventually people departed, returned to their lives with renewed purpose, returned to their communities as carriers of awakening, returned to their work of repair and healing and connection. Marcus helped clean the community center, packing up chairs and tables, erasing physical evidence of what had occurred, while knowing that energetic imprint would remain, would make this space sacred, would draw others seeking transformation. He drove home through desert darkness. Stars overhead blazed with intensity that seemed to acknowledge what had happened. Or maybe Marcus was just seeing them more clearly, seeing everything more clearly. The veil between dimensions had thinned, would continue thinning, would eventually disappear entirely as humans awakened to their true nature as multidimensional consciousness temporarily focused in physical form. Back at his trailer, Marcus sat outside in the darkness, held the crystal that had pulsed its reminder for 5 years. The crystal was different now, was dimmer, as if its function was complete, as if it had served as training wheels while Marcus learned to perceive directly and was no longer needed. He understood. The being that had given him the crystal had known that Marcus would need external reminder during the years of preparation. But now that awakening was manifesting collectively, now that Jesus' consciousness had appeared to confirm everything Marcus had been shown, external proof was no longer necessary. Marcus could access truth directly through his own consciousness, could tune into the frequency of universal awareness without requiring physical object to facilitate connection. He placed the crystal on the ground, knew he would not carry it anymore, knew that anyone who found it would receive exactly the guidance they needed, or would dismiss it as interesting rock. Either response was perfect. There were no mistakes. Everything was unfolding according to pattern too complex for individual perspective to comprehend, but too perfect to be random. Marcus felt presence again, the being, the one whose life he had saved, the one who had started him on this journey by speaking Jesus' name while dying in crashed craft. The being communicated gratitude and farewell, said that its work on earth was complete, that enough humans had been seeded with truth that the awakening would continue propagating on its own, that guardians from many worlds and dimensions had done all they could do without violating human free will, that now it was humanity's turn to choose. Marcus thanked the being, thanked it for trusting him with truth, thanked it for being patient with his confusion and doubt, thanked it for showing him that reality was larger and stranger and more beautiful than anything materialist science or religious dogma suggested. The presence faded. Marcus sat alone under stars, but did not feel alone, felt connected to everything, felt love flowing through threads that linked him to Emma, to the network, to billions of humans unconscious of their connection, but connected nonetheless, to beings on other worlds facing their own challenges, to the consciousness underlying existence itself. He understood finally what Jesus had meant by "I am the way." Not that Jesus as individual was only path, but that the principle Jesus embodied, perfect love, complete transparency to divine, absolute trust in connection, was the way, was the path every consciousness eventually walked, was the destination and the journey simultaneously. Marcus was 50 years old now, would probably live another 30 years if health held, 30 years to embody what he had learned, 30 years to be seed carrier, 30 years to repair threads wherever his life touched other lives. It was not long, was barely enough, but it was what he had, and it was enough. He went inside, lay down to sleep. The crystal outside glowed one final time, then went dark, its purpose fulfilled. And Marcus dreamed not of apocalypse or utopia, but of simple moments, of holding Emma as infant, of listening to patient's heart beating strong after crisis passed, of eating meal with strangers who became friends, of choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier, of small acts of love that seemed insignificant but were actually substance from which reality was woven. He dreamed that he was Jesus, not historical Jesus, but anyone who chose to embody love, anyone who saw through separation, anyone who remembered their divine nature. He dreamed that billions of humans were also Jesus, that second coming was not one person returning, but everyone recognizing themselves as what Jesus had been. That salvation was not being rescued by external force, but awakening to truth that they had never been lost. And when Marcus woke, he knew what his remaining years would hold. Not glory or recognition, not miracles or visions, just life. Life lived consciously. Life lived in service to connection. Life lived as prayer, as meditation, as ongoing demonstration that love was stronger than fear, that consciousness survived death, that humans were not separate egos competing in hostile universe, but were facets of single jewel reflecting light that came from source beyond comprehension. The awakening continued. Reports came daily of people having spontaneous experiences of unity consciousness, of groups gathering and feeling collective shift, of churches and temples and mosques opening to new understanding that honored mystery rather than claiming certainty, of scientists publishing research that confirmed what mystics had always known about nature of consciousness and reality. But resistance continued too. Systems built on fear and control fought to maintain themselves. Media dismissed awakening as mass delusion. Governments tried to regulate or suppress gatherings. Religious fundamentalists declared awakening was satanic deception. Violence erupted as those invested in Old World tried to prevent New World from emerging. Marcus watched the conflict with sadness, but not despair. Birth was always difficult, always involved pain and blood and risk. But life wanted to emerge, consciousness wanted to evolve. Humans wanted to awaken even when they feared what awakening required them to release. He continued his work, paramedic by day, seed carrier always, responding to emergencies while seeing beyond emergency to consciousness, learning through crisis, treating bodies while acknowledging souls, saving lives while recognizing that life was eternal and what appeared to be saved was just temporary vessel for indestructible awareness. Emma visited when she could. She had become teacher herself, not in formal educational system, which she found too restrictive, but in informal networks of young people gathering to explore consciousness and community and new ways of organizing human society around cooperation rather than competition. She was one of thousands, millions maybe, of young humans who had awakened early and were building foundation for transformed world. Marcus supported her, supported all of them. The young were future, not in abstract sense, but concretely. They would inherit whatever world current generation left them, and they were determined that world would be one worth inheriting, one where connection was valued over consumption, where well-being was prioritized over profit, where love was understood not as weakness, but as fierce commitment to mutual flourishing. Years passed. Marcus aged. His body slowed, but his consciousness expanded. He needed less sleep, less food, less stimulation, found satisfaction in simplicity, in watching sunset, in feeling wind on skin, in breathing consciously. The awakening he had undergone was integrating fully, was becoming not something he experienced, but something he was. Other members of the network also aged. Some died. Father Thomas passed at 83, surrounded by community he had helped nurture, at peace with his life and ready for transition. Marcus attended funeral and felt no grief, felt only joy that consciousness in form called Thomas had completed its learning in physical dimension and was returning to source to integrate all it had experienced. Jennifer was killed in car accident. Sudden, no warning. One moment driving to meet Marcus for coffee. Next moment consciousness released from body that had become too damaged to sustain it. Marcus and others in network mourned her absence, but celebrated her presence. Held ceremony where they shared memories and gave thanks, and felt threads that had connected them to Jennifer still glowing, still present, still transmitting love, even though physical focus of that love was gone. Death lost its sting once you understood it was transition. Humans grieved separation. That was natural, but grief was softer when you knew separation was temporary, that consciousness remained connected across dimensions, that death was comma, not period. Marcus turned 60. Retired from paramedic work. His body was still capable, but his energy was needed elsewhere. He became full-time support for the awakening, traveled to gatherings, offered counsel to those undergoing difficult transitions, wrote about his experiences, not for publication, just for record, just so that future humans might understand how awakening had unfolded. The world continued its dual trajectory. Systems collapsed. New systems emerged. Violence persisted. Peace movements grew. Climate catastrophe loomed. Solutions materialized. Despair and hope coexisted. Marcus understood both were necessary. Darkness made light visible. Pain made healing meaningful. Crisis created opportunity for transformation that comfort never provided. Emma married, had child, named her Grace. Marcus became grandfather, held tiny human in his arms, and felt presence of ancient consciousness, choosing to enter physical form one more time, choosing to participate in great experiment of embodied existence, choosing to contribute to awakening through fresh perspective, unconditioned by the past. He looked into Grace's eyes and saw infinity looking back, saw that this child was not blank slate, but was complete consciousness temporarily forgetting its nature so it could have experience of remembering. Saw that his role was not to teach her who to be, but to remind her who she already was, to protect space where she could unfold according to her own inner guidance, rather than according to external expectations. The world Grace was born into was different from world Marcus had been born into 60 years earlier. Not perfect, still filled with suffering and injustice and confusion, but changing, shifting. More humans awake to their connection, more systems structured around cooperation. More understanding that consciousness was primary and matter was secondary, that spiritual was not opposed to scientific, but was complementary perspective on single unified reality. Churches were transforming, releasing dogma, embracing mystery. Father Thomas's approach was spreading. Christianity was rediscovering what Jesus actually taught before institutions had buried teaching under political agendas and power structures. Islam was returning to its mystical roots. Buddhism was expanding beyond cultural confines. Hinduism was sharing its ancient wisdom with broader audience. New spiritual movements were emerging that honored all traditions while being bound by none. The awakening was succeeding, not completely, not universally, but sufficiently. Enough humans had remembered their connection that web was stabilizing. Threads were being rewoven faster than they were fraying. Humanity would survive, would evolve, would eventually join community of awakened species that spanned cosmos. Marcus understood he would not live to see completion. This was multi-generational work, would take centuries maybe, but foundation was being laid. Seeds were planted. Garden would bloom long after current gardeners had returned to soil. He was at peace with that. His role was not to finish, but to begin, not to see entire journey, but to take his steps and trust others would take theirs. Jesus had not completed the work, had started it, had demonstrated what was possible, and billions across 2,000 years had continued that work, each contributing their piece to puzzle too vast for any individual to perceive whole. On his 65th birthday, Marcus sat in desert where his journey had begun, same location where he had found crashed craft and dying being. Nothing marked the spot. Sand and rock looked identical to every other stretch of desert, but Marcus felt the significance, felt the threads of causality connecting that night to this moment, connecting the terrified paramedic he had been to the awakened human he had become. He thought about the being, wondered if it was watching, wondered if it remembered the frightened human who had saved its life without understanding what he was participating in, decided that it must remember. That consciousness forgot nothing. That every interaction was eternally preserved in the field of awareness that underlay physical reality. Marcus spoke aloud, spoke to the being, spoke to Jesus' consciousness, spoke to network of awakened humans, spoke to Grace, sleeping peacefully in Emma's arms back at the house, spoke to himself, spoke to silence that was not empty but was saturated with presence. He said, "I understand now. Took me 65 years, but I finally understand. We are not separate, never were." Separation was teaching tool, was way for consciousness to experience contrast, to learn about itself through temporary forgetting, followed by remembering. And I was blessed to remember, to awaken, to see the truth that had always been present, but which I had been too conditioned to perceive. He said, Jesus was right. Love is the answer, not because it feels good, though it does, not because morality demands it, though it might, but because it is what we are, is the substance of consciousness, is the force that holds reality together. And when we forget to love, when we choose fear instead, we participate in our own fragmentation, in our own suffering, in our own diminishment. He said, the alien showed me more than Jesus' name, showed me that Jesus was not aberration but example, showed me that every human could embody what Jesus embodied, showed me that second coming was not single savior descending, but millions of humans ascending, remembering their divine nature, becoming transparent to source, living as love incarnate. He said, "And I am grateful for the terror of that night, for the confusion of the years that followed, for the loneliness of carrying truth no one believed, for the joy of finding others who understood, for the honor of being seed carrier, for the privilege of witnessing awakening unfold, for every moment painful and beautiful that brought me to this moment where I can sit in desert and know I am home." The sun set, stars emerged, desert cooled rapidly the way deserts do. Marcus did not move, sat in stillness, feeling breath move in and out of body, feeling heartbeat that would eventually stop, feeling consciousness that would never stop, feeling love that transcended all conditions and circumstances. And he knew that when his time came, when his body wore out and consciousness was ready to transition, he would not be afraid, would release this form gratefully, would return to source carrying all he had learned, would rest, would integrate, would perhaps choose to incarnate again when conditions were right, when new lessons awaited, when service could be rendered. But for now, in this moment, this was enough, was more than enough, was everything. Marcus stood, walked back to his truck, drove home through darkness, crawled into bed exhausted and content. The last thing he saw before sleep claimed him was crystal on his nightstand, still dark but somehow still present, still reminding him that truth was real even when invisible, that connection persisted even when imperceptible, that love was eternal even when everything else was temporary. He slept deeply, dreamed of light, and woke to find that the awakening continued, would always continue, because consciousness never stopped evolving, never stopped exploring, never stopped choosing to remember what it had temporarily chosen to forget. Truth or fiction, perhaps not even the storyteller knows. Here, stories exist to touch and make you reflect. The magical reveals itself only to those who allow themselves to feel, not to those who insist on seeking certainties.